Good afternoon, folks. I know it's 2 o'clock on the dot here, so we'll go ahead and get started, and hopefully as people come along and join in, we'll continue moving forward. So good afternoon, good morning for anyone who's out west. My name is Sara Nasseri. I'm an attorney at PilieroMazza, and I'm joined today by Ms. Nicole Ferrito, Director of Human Resources at Boost, LLC. Together, we're presenting this joint webinar, joint presentation on the Ofccp, essentially what we're calling the 2020 Ofccp refresh and reset. It seems like during these crazy, unprecedented times, we all need a little refresh and reset on a number of things. But today's focus is going to be the Ofccp and what it is and what compliance measures federal contractors need to take, as well as kind of what to expect. So, as mentioned, my name is Sara Nasseri. I'm an attorney in PilieroMazza's Labor and Employment Practice Group. I advise clients on a full range of equal employment opportunity laws, particularly focused with compliance with workplace-related laws, regulations, and of course, compliance with federal contractors' affirmative action and non-discrimination obligations, which is, as we're going to discuss today, enforced by the Ofccp. And I'm going to let Nicole go ahead and introduce herself.
Thank you so much, Sara. Again, my name is Nicole Ferrito. I am the HR Director here at Boost. A little bit of my background: I have over 15 years of comprehensive HR experience, all exclusively within the government contracting space. During that time, I worked in a variety of capacities, and at some point pretty much have touched everything related to HR. I've also worked in organizations of differing sizes, from very small companies to large multinational government contractors. So as a result, I have seen how HR operates at both the smallest level as well as on a very large scale. So I come with a unique perspective, especially with regards to the reporting requirements and what we're going to talk about today, because I have both been the person leading the company side of it, as well as just being someone who's gathering data for someone else.
Awesome. Thank you, Nicole. And, as we kind of move along this presentation, I think you'll really kind of notice the differences in our skills. I mean, I'm going to focus more so on kind of the legal bases and kind of what the Ofccp is, what the laws are that the agency enforces. And I'm really going to, hand it over to Nicole, just based on her experience and expertise, to really kind of dive into best practices and experiences that she's had and kind of, take it from there. So, on that note, before I kind of dive into the next two general slides, by all means, if any of you have any questions or any technical issues come up, please go ahead and feel free to send or type in whatever question or concern you have in our little chat box. We'll do the best we can to kind of answer questions throughout our 1 hour presentation, and we'll also see if there's maybe a few minutes we can save at the end to kind of tackle a few questions. But we still encourage you, regardless of time constraints, to go ahead and send over questions. And what we'll do is we'll probably generate a transcript of any and all questions, and then Nicole and I we'll touch base and reach out to everyone individually who's sent out questions. So please use that at your pleasure and send us questions as need be. PilieroMazza, where I work at, is a full service business law firm. Our client base is government contractors and commercial businesses all over the United States. I obviously work in the labor and employment practice group, but we have a number of other areas of focus, including government contracting, litigation, corporate, and a variety of other practice areas that are all listed on there. And Nicole, a little bit about Boost.
Absolutely. So here at Boost, we support government contractors exclusively, regardless of size. We provide a whole range of services, as you can see from our list, from accounting and pricing to marketing and branding. We also provide full life cycle HR support, including recruiting, staff augmentation, such as generalist services. So if you don't have an HR department or if you need some extra surge HR support, we can definitely bring someone in to be your part-time generalist or something in that capacity. We also do compliance reviews, definitely SCA. That's one of our main products, so to speak. Also, we also do strategic HR assessments. Will come into your organization, we'll look at your pipeline, and we'll help you get to where your goals are 3-5 years down the road, as well as helping you to see where your pain points are at the moment and help come up with a resolution. So we work to support all of our clients to be successful and efficient in your operations.
Awesome. And a little disclaimer before we kind of dive in. Obviously, the information and content that we're about to present to you is strictly for informational purposes. If anyone needs specific legal advice or legal counsel, by all means, reach out to myself or any member of PilieroMazza, or of course, use Boost as a wonderful resource for, what they have to offer, but nothing we are about to discuss should be construed as any sort of legal advice. Awesome. So let's go ahead and get started. So I wanted to kind of start just talking a little bit, generally about what the Ofccp is, what the agency is responsible for, and the laws it enforces, because I think, there are a lot of various nuances with regard to what specific laws, apply to what specific contractors. You have to meet monetary thresholds, you have to meet, a certain number of employees. There's basic coverage requirements versus, full-on requirement for developing an affirmative action plan or program. So, there's a lot of different nuances, and, obviously we only have an hour here, whereas we could, really do an hour just on Executive Order 11246, an hour just on AP development. I mean, there's obviously a lot of detail that cannot be discussed in just the hour time frame that we have, but going to do the best we can to kind of at least provide you with a general understanding, high level overview of what the Ofccp is, and the obligations and compliance requirements needed for federal contractors. So Ofccp, the Office of Federal Contract Compliance Programs, it's an agency within the Department of Labor that essentially focuses on preventing federal contractors and subcontractors from using discriminatory employment practices. So, the way that the Ofccp enforces this mechanism is by conducting compliance evaluations or audits that kind of cover all facets of the employment process. So they look at not only, promotions and transferring and all personnel activities within your workforce and the employees that you have, but also sourcing and hiring. So at the applicant stage as well. So I think that's also important, is to recognize that, these obligations extend well beyond just your workforce and employees that you have. And they also attach to applicants pre-hire, right? There's the mission statement of the Ofccp. I don't necessarily need to kind of go through this, but as you'll see, they essentially work to promote diversity, enforce the law. They're responsible for complying with the legal requirements to take affirmative action and also not discriminate on the basis of those various protected categories, right? So I think the kind of two ways to think about what the Ofccp does is, one, they ensure and enforce equal employment opportunity laws, right? But then on the other hand, they're also ensuring that federal contractors take that affirmative step or affirmative action to ensure that that discrimination doesn't take place either. So You know, it's kind of twofold where the obligations are for contractors. So, you know, read through the Ofccp mission statement there. It kind of delineates everything that the Ofccp is based on. So what are the different laws that the Ofccp administers? So there are three main laws that the Ofccp tackles. So first and foremost is Executive Order 11246, which essentially prohibits discrimination and requires affirmative action employment for applicants and employees to ensure equal employment opportunity regardless of race, color, religion, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, or national origin. So the Executive Order 11246 essentially establishes the requirements for non-discriminatory practice. And so it's kind of like the bigger sort of law that the Ofccp kind of works through and works on. And you'll see kind of Executive Order 11246 probably more prominently. But, you know, that's only just one of the three. We have Section 503 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, better known as just Section 503, which focuses on individuals with disability. So it requires affirmative action as well as prohibits employment discrimination with regard to individuals with disability. Now, the Ofccp has established a nationwide 7% utilization goal for sort of like and again, this is kind of an aspirational goal. I mean, it's not necessarily a quota. So as a federal contractor, you need not necessarily meet or exceed that 7%. However, you must, you know, essentially show efforts to attain and achieve that goal, right? So essentially saying that the goal is to attain at least 7% of your workforce to be, you know, employees with individuals with disabilities. And, you know, I think it's important to note also that the definition of individuals with disabilities is pretty broad, right? So it covers not only mental disabilities, but also physical disabilities. So the scope is very broad. So I encourage contractors, and this is something that we can discuss offline, but to really kind of evaluate and review what requirements for an individual with disability are, right? So what kind of person and what kind of disability is encompassed under that category. And then lastly is the Vietnam Era Veterans Readjustment Assistance Act of 1974, better known as VEVRA. You probably know why, but essentially VEVRA prohibits discrimination and requires affirmative action in employment for protected veterans. Ofccp has also set a national benchmark of, I believe it's 5.9% for hiring of protected veterans. But, you know, it's also a benchmark, and I believe they do change it quite often. So it's good to kind of keep tabs and check on the Ofccp website as far as what that benchmark is. But again, something to also note here is that protected veterans includes a wide array of categories of veterans, including disabled veterans. So again, point here, you know, make sure beyond just understanding what the laws encompass, that we're also understanding kind of the scope of the individuals that fall under each of these laws, because it might be a lot more than what you think or what you're expecting. This next slide is great. It's something that I have bookmarked on my personal computer when I'm working through it. I would encourage any contractor to have this kind of printed out or have it kind of at their fingertips, because it really just kind of showcases what those nuances are as far as what the jurisdictional thresholds are and where your coverage kicks in, right? So you'll note that there's the three different categories, the 3 different laws. So you have Executive Order 11246, you have Section 503 on the bottom there, and then VEVRA to the right. So basically, the way they have it set up is they have it divided into supply and service or non-construction contractors versus construction contractors, and then they have it divided up based on requirements to develop an AAP or just basic coverage, right? So generally speaking, under Executive Order 11246, any number of employees plus contracts worth or valued at more than $10,000, you're going to have coverage and you're going to have to meet the obligations of Executive Order 11246. So this includes things like ensuring you have the EEO tagline on your offer letters, if that you're having it on your job postings, that you have your EEO job posters up in the workplace, and kind of all those basic requirements. But you'll note that the AAP coverage requirements don't kick in until you have at least 50 or more employees or a contract of $50,000 or more. And this is with regard to both Executive Order 11246 and Section 503. VEVRA has a little bit of a different requirement for AAP coverage. But generally speaking, for Executive Order 11246 and Section 503, you will need to develop your affirmative action plan or program if you have 50 or more employees and you have a contract of $50,000 or more. That's an and between those 2 requirements, so it's not an either or. You need to meet both of those requirements for the coverage to kick in. And we'll talk a little bit more a bit later with regard to kind of what an AAP is and what kind of things you have to include in there. Basically within 120 days of obtaining a federal contract, so once you meet the definition of a federal contractor, you have 120 days to develop your AAP. And then you have an obligation annually to update or keep that AAP current. So it's definitely important. It's definitely critical that you understand where your obligations are depending on the size of your workforce as well as the value of your contract. And it's also, equally important to understand what different laws apply to the types of contract or type of contract that you have, right? So you want to ensure that you're understanding the regulations and understanding which ones necessarily apply to you. So this is a good handy dandy cheat sheet. I would highly recommend folks, and it's directly linked on the Ofccp website. So review it, know it inside and out. And certainly if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us moving forward. So kind of what we talked about, right? Collectively, these laws make it illegal for contractors and subcontractors doing business with the federal government, so federal contractors, to discriminate employment on the basis of those protected categories listed. And, Ofccp takes its job pretty seriously, right? I mean, they review when they have they release their CSAL list, their scheduling list with their list of contractors that they're going to audit and who are going to undergo a compliance evaluation. They really review all of your documentation and your AAP if you're required to have one. And they will, if they do find any violations, they will certainly enforce and, move forward with those. So it's something to definitely take very seriously. I think, the Ofccp, at least from what I've seen the past 2 years under Director Craig Lean, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the name at least, but he has been pretty proactive and been taking, a lot of measures in kind of increasing OFCCP's presence. I mean, he's issued a number of directives throughout the past 2 years now that he's been director. And by directives, I mean essentially there are sort of like guidances or guidelines that the OFCCP issues to provide contractors with a general understanding of what the OFCCP's obligations are, what their enforcement mechanisms are. And he's done a good job of kind of increasing transparency from the OFCCP for contractors. I think, you know, he came on board promising increased transparency, increased efficiency, and he's issued directives to that end. Now, how much of it do we really see in practice is a whole other story. But, you know, he has tried to at least take these proactive steps in trying to kind of be more transparent with the federal contractor community as far as how the OFCCP is going to enforce these laws. On that note, we just received word, I think it was in February of this year, that President Trump did nominate Craig Lean to Inspector General at the Office of Personnel Management, OPM. So, you know, that process is obviously still ongoing. So we're not sure at what point his nomination will move forward and he'll be confirmed. But all that to say, I mean, we should be having a new OFCCP director at sometime in the near future. So it'll be interesting to see how a change on that front will change kind of how the OFCCP operates. So I'd say kind of let's stay tuned for that. But, you know, other than that, I mean, we have seen some good initiatives come from the OFCCP with regard to the contractor community. But I also will caution that what we're seeing on the national level may not necessarily translate at the regional level. So I'm sure many of you know the OFCCP obviously has its director and all those folks kind of in the national office here in DC, but the OFCCP is also broken up and has its agencies across 6 different regions across the nation, right? So Pacific region, Northeast, Southeast, and each of those regions have their regional directors, and each of those regions are responsible for compliance of evaluations of contractors in those regions, of course, right? So in my experience, we haven't seen sort of a consistent approach among the various regional offices, which has caused much heartburn for me in my practice. But, you know, again, it's something that Craig Lean and the national office has said that they're going to work on and, you know, try to kind of improve on that consistency throughout the various regional offices. But it is something to flag as different compliance officers from different regions are going to approach things differently, unfortunately. And I think probably Nicole can speak to this a bit later, but you know, something to kind of keep in mind as well. On that note, Nicole, do you want to kind of dive into AAP requirements?
I sure will. Thank you so much. So let's start off with who is required to prepare an AAP. Sara touched on this before in the slide with all the great images on them. So, but I will just repeat it because you can never repeat it enough. 50 employees in the HR world, that is a huge number. You change your perspective as far as how you administer your HR department. So amongst the things that make this number significant is it does require you to have an up-to-date affirmative action plan on hand. If you have 50 employees and a contract of at least $50,000, you are required to complete and have one on hand. Like I said, it doesn't mean that you have to submit it, but you do need to have it so that if you are audited, you have it ready to go. And like Sara said, it's completed by 120 days after that contract award. Now, the $50,000 isn't, there are some caveats to that. So you definitely want to kind of read over what the requirements are, but that's the standard language. It's 50 employees and a contract of at least 50,000. So this is where I come
actually,
in.
Nicole, I'm gonna,
Yeah.
sorry, I just really quickly, I do want to flag, because this actually just happened this week, and I think the Ofccp was kind of talking about it previously, but we didn't really see anything come into fruition. But just, I believe, September 14th, so it was on a Monday, in the Federal Register, we got official notice that the Ofccp is attempting to seek approval for an online AP certification. Essentially, they're trying to seek regulatory authority to require federal contractors to annually certify they've prepared AAPs via an online interface, regardless of whether or not they've been audited, right? So obviously the Ofccp cannot conduct a compliance review of every federal contract that's out there every year. So what they're trying to do now is seek approval for this, what they deem to be kind of an efficient alternative method to ensure that as a federal contractor who is obligated to have an affirmative action plan, that you are actually meeting those obligations. So keep that in mind. Obviously, this is yet to actually be imposed, and kind of who knows what the process is going to be and how it's going to move forward. But, you know, all that to say, I mean, when these requirements kick in, they're not only, you know, kicked in for people who are going to undergo an audit, right? These are obligations that you have to meet under law, regardless of whether or not you are randomly selected to undergo a compliance evaluation or not. So just want to kind of flag that and make sure that people are aware of that, because it may certainly put more pressure on folks to kind of get these stuff in order and get organized as far as that goes.
That is good to know, and actually something that I didn't know that was going on. So I learned something new today.
There you go.
Yay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about best practices, how to survive reporting season, and things of that nature, because as I kind of mentioned before, I have been through countless, so many that I do not recall. So if you can learn from my mistakes, that would just make me so proud. So I think probably the first thing on surviving reporting season is being very proactive. So if you're in HR, this is, while we are centered, this conversation is centered on Ofccp reporting, that is actually not the only reporting that is going on at the same time. So in the HR space, reporting season, in my opinion, really starts at the tail end of the spring and goes all the way through September 30th. Because you're not just doing these reporting, you may be doing AAP planning if you want a contract that happens at this time, but also you're doing your benefits and 401k reporting, your 5,500 filings, those types of things. And depending on the number of employees you have in these plans and in your organization, you're doing an audit along with those filings. So there's a lot going on during this time of year. So it is imperative, I can't stress this enough, to be proactive in your approach to these events. I personally had a list of key dates for the whole entire year on a dry erase board on my wall. So every time I would look up, I would remember, oh, it's almost July. Let me get ready for this. And also too, it kind of helped because anytime my team would come into my office, they would kind of know that that's what's going on. So that I don't have to constantly harp on it in meetings, although at some point it does become the central focus of discussions. I also suggest 30 days out, ensuring that you have your so now moving back to the Ofccp reporting that we're going to be talking more about, 30 days out, so around the beginning of July, because the portal typically opens on or about August 1st. You want to make sure that you have that username and passwords from the prior year reporting. Perhaps the person who reported on it the prior year has left. You want to make sure that they left you with that information. And depending on what time of year it is, that's not going to be something that's on the forefront of your head, in your mind. It could very well be that it happened in January. Well, no one's thinking about your VETS and EEO reporting in January. with one exception, because now we are, and we'll talk about that a little bit, that the EEO report is actually going to be due at a later date. But typically, you're not thinking about reporting in this form or fashion at the beginning of the year. So it's important to make sure that you have your username and your password all ready to go. Make sure it's valid and active. And if this is the first year that you are required to report because you didn't hit that 50 prior to reporting season, you want to make sure that you're registered. It gives you ample time to read over the process, because if you've never done it before, it can be tricky. And even if you have done it before, sometimes it's tricky, and they make changes to the reports every now and then, and they will tell you what those changes are. They don't always make sense or not always intuitive. So giving yourself 30 days to get it on your mind, make sure that you read over the report, and strategize for when the portal opens, taking a look at what's on your calendar and seeing what you have going on, so you can make sure that you really schedule some time to focus on this report. It really helps you in the long run to be ahead of the game. Oh, and the other thing that is also, and before I forget, this also comes into play because one time we did an HRIS conversion, and I hadn't gotten to the point where we had verified all the recording and the reporting requirements. So when I went in to look, luckily I'd already made this mistake once before. In January, I was able to go through our HRIS system and get those kinks worked out before I had to pull those reports. So those are the types of things you want to think of during an HRIS conversion, things like that.
Yeah, definitely good to know. You know, I'm looking, Nicole, just really briefly on the questions list. I'll tackle just one or two of these, and then we'll try to tackle more as we go on. Really quickly, are the slides going to be available as well as the recording? I believe yes and yes. I will confirm with our folks who are doing all the great work on the technical end of this, but I believe that's yes and yes. Do part-time employees count? Yes. So under the regulations, an employee includes both full-time and part-time employees. And we can kind of tackle the rest, because I think there is another question on there that actually is a great transition question for something that we're going to talk about in a little bit. So I'll hand the mic back to you.
So, thank you. So again, along the same lines as being proactive, as being organized, try to stay consistent with the payroll weeks you're used for reporting in the past. It's not necessary, but for me, I like to keep it congruent and consistent. In HR, everything is about consistency. And when I do sit down and start working on the reports, I like to have the prior year's reports handy. I like to have a review and comparison just to see if there are possible disparities. And in most cases, you're going to know what those disparities are, whether it be that you grew in size, it doubled in size during the last year, or you lost a significant program that took your numbers down a little bit, or you changed your targeted recruiting based off of something that came up in the last year report. I like it to have it handy, and it also just helps you to really understand where your organization is from a compliance and human capital perspective. Again, it's just a best practice. They don't say that you have to enter in anything from the years past, but it never hurts to know where your organization was, and where it's going.
Good advice.
And this is something, again, like I said before, reporting season isn't just about the Ofccp reporting. So it's a good idea to be very deliberate about vacation scheduling, especially if you're a department of one and you're the one leading the efforts, or you're the only one involved. So it can be a very busy time. Even if you have others in the department, they very well want to delegate more work during this time, because if you're the one leading the effort, then you're going to be overwhelmed as it is because remember, work doesn't stop just because it's reporting season. It would be great if it did. It would be definitely great if it stopped during audit season, but it doesn't. So you really want to have a delegation plan down as well. So it's very essential that you schedule your PTO deliberately so that there's ample coverage and no delays resulting due to these very avoidable factors. Again, I like being transparent with my team. I also like trying to draw my team into this so they learn a little bit from this. So maybe next time I can go on vacation in September. It doesn't mean I will, but it's always helpful to have your team really know how these reports and these audits work. But again, when your team knows that these things are going on, they'll also understand when you say, hey, look, from this date to this date is blackout, nobody's going on vacation, or things like that. So this was just me, and definitely, everyone's organizations work differently. But I personally never took vacations in the summertime when I was the one driving all the reporting in my roles. So really, and to this day, I still don't take vacations much in the summertime, regardless of how I fit into the role of reporting at my organizations I work at now. But it's just what worked best for me to ensure that I was available during the time in case auditors, like in the case of a 5500, they'll call you once they're done auditing and they'll want other questions. But in this case too, especially if you're trying to work out kinks with your data, or you don't have access to reports that you thought you did, it just really helps when you don't leave the organization at some point. So again, that's just what I did. It worked best for me. But you really want to ensure all your data is there and complete. And one of the best ways to do it is to be there during that time. So October was my vacation time, and it was really actually needed after doing all the reporting and doing all the auditing and things like that. So to me, that's just a best practice, at least something to think about.
Right. I think, and sorry, folks, I was trying to go through questions and I had to kind of toggle back and forth between the slides there, so I apologize. But Nicole, I mean, to your point, I think really the key point here is just being proactive, right? So as soon as you review those jurisdictional thresholds, the kind of legal term that we're using there, but as soon as you review those and you determine that your establishment or your obligations are kicked in, then go ahead and start getting things together and start putting a team together and taking all these measures just to ensure that should you have to unfortunately go through an audit, that you're prepared and you can certainly kind of take some stress off of yourself and everyone in the company by just being proactive and doing all these things that you discussed, just to make sure that things go smoothly.
Okay, so I'd like to turn.
Lastly, Nicole, I know,
yeah, no, go for
it. Yep, no, go ahead.
So I'd like to turn for a few moments and talk about handling employee complaints, because a lot of sometimes your AAP audits will come from a Department of Labor charge or investigation, things of this matter. So, but complaint processes are something that you should have in place as it is. So it's very important that you have a very robust system of intake for how the employee complaints come in. You want to make sure that that system is very widely communicated and advertised so that your employees know if they've got a complaint or an issue or something that they want to speak about, this is how you do it. Because without that, the employee is going to think that their only recourse is to go to an agency, the DOL, the EEOC, NLRB. So the more that you can communicate this process, the better off you'll be. You also want to ensure that there's a central person or department who is responsible for handling and or leading the investigation and the intake, whether it be an ethics officer, an ombudsman, or most typically the HR department. But depending on your organization, how they're structured, it could be any one of the three or all. And most importantly, there has to be a method for receiving anonymous complaints. And you might say, well, Nicole, there are all these laws that make that make retaliation illegal under, and my handbook says we do not tolerate retaliation. And while that very well may be the case, and I am emphatically, opposed to retaliation, an employee is never going to feel that there isn't a chance that they won't be. So a lot of employees just don't feel comfortable coming forward for fear of retaliation. And you want to keep in mind that retaliation isn't always blatant. And quite frankly, most often it is very subtle. And even if you as an HR professional or a manager can prove or know that this action that the employee who's come forward thinks is retaliation, even if you know that it's not and it can be proven otherwise, it has been my experience that an employee will nearly always feel as if anything that has happened to them negatively since they've brought that complaint forward, they will always feel like it is retaliation. So, and sometimes you'll get far more frank complaints when you have a method for anonymous complaints to be made. And lastly, it is important that as part of that intake communication and things like that, that you publish the schedule to address concerns. Never promise a deadline for the outcome, but you do want to promise that this complaint will be addressed by this date, whether it just be like, hey, I want to let you know that we have received your complaint and we are going to do a diligent investigation, and we will be reaching out to you to discuss next steps and an investigation at that time. Clearly, if they've filed an anonymous complaint, it quite won't be the same, but it is very imperative that you publish that schedule and you stick to it the best that you can. Again, like I said, you can't promise a deadline for outcome. It could take a day, it could take a week, it can take months. But at least let the employees know when you will address it primarily at the beginning.
Right. Yeah, I think, this, handling employee complaints is not just something that, is beneficial when comes time for an Ofccp audit, but it's something that, just generally speaking, across every facet of labor and employment laws, you want to ensure that you have a robust system in place, but also that you're effectively communicating those policies and the processes to your employees, right? So definitely critical in more ways than one, but obviously with this regard as well. On that note, so one of the other questions that I kind of wanted to set up for these next slides are, the question was, where on the Ofccp website do you identify if the company is subject to an audit? Well, actually, that couldn't have worked out perfectly. So just as of this past Friday, September 11th, the Ofccp published its new fiscal year 2020 CSAL list. CSAL means Corporate Scheduling Announcement List. And this is essentially their list of contractors that are going to be undergoing a compliance evaluation or audit. So there's two distinct lists. One is for those supply and service contractors. And I believe there's over, I think the count was like 2,250 contractors on the supply and service list, and then also a list of construction contractors. And on that list, I believe there's about 200 contractors. I always get questions from clients who do end up getting notice of an audit. The $1 million question is, are these lists generated randomly? Per the Ofccp, yes. Based on what they said, they actually, in I think 2018, released a pretty transparent memorandum kind of outlining what their process is for how they select contractors. But essentially, if you have a contract with the federal government, then they pull your name out of, the national database, and then they kind of go through a process of elimination. They remove any canceled contracts, any contracts below that $50,000 threshold. And then they kind of generate this available pool. And then from that available pool, they go ahead and kind of assign it to the different regional offices depending on where the contractor is. So they claim it's random, so there's no real way to kind of not make yourself susceptible to an audit, as long as you are a federal contractor and you meet those thresholds. Then unfortunately you are in Ofccp's radar and you can potentially be on notice and undergo an audit. So the list is out there. I can certainly, if helpful, provide the link for everyone, but it's also should just be readily available if you just go on Ofccp's website. They have a separate FOIA library that they have these two lists published. Now the CSALs essentially provide kind of a courtesy notice to the contractors, and with that notice, then the OFCC actually begins sending its official OMB approved scheduling letters. And then once you receive those letters, that's where your kind of 30-day timeline starts kicking in as far as when you have to get your AAPs to the compliance officers. And then generally, compliance officers are pretty lenient about giving you an extension for all of the underlying support data. So, as long as you can get the, basic AAP narrative to the compliance officer within the 30 days, then requesting an extension for the underlying support data is also generally okay. And you should have, be able to request and get more time for putting together all that stuff. On that note, I think one important tip that I can just kind of provide everyone just out of my experience is make sure that you keep the communication lines open with whatever compliance officer you've been assigned to, right? So I think, people maybe start, you get intimidated or, you kind of don't know where to start. But I think kind of acknowledging that this individual is there, and obviously maybe not, some people might feel like this person is against them or is, going out to get them. But I think just making sure that you keep that communication line open with them, it'll really kind of save some energy and kind of help with the process moving forward and kind of build some kind of goodwill, at the start of the relationship, so that, moving down the line, things can be less stressful than they already probably are. I will say, obviously we are dealing with a global pandemic right now, and the OFCCP has acknowledged that. I don't know, and I haven't seen anything about any kind of official word on automatic extensions to, submission of AAPs and support data and all that stuff. But I believe their website kind of has this OFCCP COVID-19 response page that essentially says, if contractors are experiencing difficulty in, putting together documents, or, for example, having employees accessible during a review, or, facing any other challenges, that the OFCCP will remain flexible by coordinating other means and, reasonable extensions where needed. So again, this kind of goes to that communication point. If you are having trouble with certain obligations or certain, facets of what you need to do during the audit process because of the pandemic and in light of everything that's going on, let the compliance officer know, be open about it, and, hopefully they can be reasonable as far as accommodations. Obviously, they've also made clear that despite the pandemic, OFCCP's obligations and regulations are, still applicable to all federal contractors. So, regardless of everything going on, you're still obligated to meet all of your requirements under the law. I have received questions from clients with regard to this March, I think it was 18th memorandum that the Ofccp issued, essentially granting a 3-month exemption and waiver from affirmative action requirements. It's called the national interest exemption, and a lot of clients are, are asking, well, does this apply to me? This is great. Do I kind of have a 3-month, breather here? But it's very, very narrow. I mean, the exemption only applies to contracts, new contracts also, that provide COVID-19 relief to the federal government and federal agencies. So it's very, very narrow, very, very limited, and chances are it has no application to most contractors here, but it is something to kind of take note of. And trying to think if there's anything else as far as kind of COVID related stuff. Yeah, I don't think so. But all that to say, the scheduling lists are out. So I would encourage everyone to go to the Ofccp website, review the list, and just check to see if you are listed on those lists. Oh, I did provide the link. There we go. So the link is right there. And if anyone has any specific questions, again, feel free to let us know. But what we'll talk about now, Nicole is going to kind of take the lead in this, is kind of best practices when it comes time to dealing with an Ofccp audit. So I think the latter half of that question that we had was basically, how can we prepare for an Ofccp audit? And so Nicole, go ahead, take the lead on this one, as I know you've had plenty of experiences and know the stresses that come along with preparing for one.
I have, but what I will tell you is that there's no way to know what kind of investigator you're going to get. I've had investigators that literally came and went. I've had investigators where the investigations went on for multiple years, and I'm not kidding. So the best thing that you can do, when you get that letter, is just not freak out. Look at it the way I look at it at some point was, it was a learning experience. I learned something out of every single one that I ever had. But the one thing that really helped me through, and I can't keep stressing it enough, is to be organized. These audits never come at a great time. It's not like the Ofccp calls up and be like, hey, what's a good time for you to come and be audited? It's almost always going to come when you just won a contract and you've got to onboard 300 people, which happened to me not once but twice. So if you're ready for one, it makes it that much easier, so that you're not stressing out any more that you normally would. So again, having your documents in a central place where multiple people have access to them, because, God forbid you be sick or something happens, somebody else knows where to find them. The other thing that's important is you have to keep your AAPs for at least 3 years prior. The investigator may not request to review these prior years. I've had it happen both ways, but they do have the right to do so. And of course, don't offer them up anything that they're not asking for. So if they don't ask for them, definitely don't say that you have them. But those are some things these are some things that have helped me get through them.
Oh, Nicole, I just have to kind of underscore what you just said there, as far as do not over provide documents, right? I mean, you think you're trying to do yourself a favor by engaging with a compliance officer and providing a little bit more, just because you think that'll make them go away. And with experience, this is when contractors knock on our door at the law firm and say, help, because you've now turned over a document that you thought was probably, meaningless as far as what the Ofccp was going to review. But sure enough, there's some information, there's some comp information in there that can kind of prompt them to start digging in a little bit more and more. And, there you go. You've found yourself in and dug yourself in a deep hole there. So only strictly provide what they have asked for, and leave it at that. If they do start requesting more information, it has to be based on certain discrepancies, or, they have to obviously have reason and authority for requesting more documents. And that's, for another day to kind of dive into all that stuff, but just can't stress enough, only provide what they've asked for.
So in my career, one thing, I've spent a lot of time in employee relations, a majority of my career, and the one thing that I've learned is to always work under the assumption that you're going to get a charge, you're going to get a lawsuit, you're going to get an audit letter. So I've seen my career as really more of a chess game, staying 3 steps ahead. It's important that and we've talked about this, we've given you some background, is to at least have a good working knowledge of what the agencies are, what their functions are, and why they operate the way they do. It really helps you out. It's always best to know why they're asking for what they're asking for, and not just that they're going to ask for it. You tend to be a little bit less defensive when you know the reason why they're asking for something. Again, if you can't anticipate what they're going to ask for, what their responses are going to be when you tell them something, it really can help your investigation. And again, this is by far not an innate job skill. It's very much learned through missteps, being in lengthy audits, being in litigation, things of that nature. But it is something that as you go through them more, you do learn to understand and know what they're going to ask and be ready for that ahead of time. And again, like we keep saying, keep your files detailed, keep them centrally located so that if they are needed, you know where they are.
Right.
Okay, sorry. So I just want to talk a little about what desk audits are versus on-site audits. It typically starts, and definitely Sarah, jump in if you want me to clarify. Or desk audit is typically where it starts, and definitely recently. However, that desk audit could derail, and if so, then it turns into an on-site audit, and it typically derails due to record keeping issues, discrepancies, things like that. But I've also had instances where the investigation is derailed because they do tend to go and talk to your employees at some point, or they have the right to do so. And even you can have the argument, which we have tried to use before, that my employees work in SCIFs, they work in classified areas, they work on a military base that you have to get permission to get onto. The DOL doesn't care. They're going to find a way to get to your employees, whether you like it or not. And it's been my experience that a lot of times once they talk to the employees, if you've got disgruntled employees, this is only going to get worse. So again, to go back to kind of what I said, if you have good practices in place to ensure that your investigations are robust and things like that, it could potentially keep you from having a full-on on-site nightmarish investigation.
Right.
And again,
we have a few minutes here, Nicole, so probably, yeah.
So the one other thing that I want to talk about is having a very robust applicant tracking system. It's an invaluable investment. I know sometimes you're working in small organizations, you don't have a lot of budget, but it's my professional opinion that spending a few dollars up front, whether it be with your applicant tracking system or paying someone else to do your affirmative action plan for you, might cost you a little bit up front, but it is an invaluable investment that could keep you from having fines, restitution, legal fees, and possibly even debarment. So I'm not telling you to go get the one that has the most bells and whistles. I definitely have some favorites, but there's thousands of them out there. So, really vet your ATS, and a lot of them will even do the Ofccp reporting for you. Clearly, they're not going to do your AAP, but they will do a lot of your report submissions for you. So I can't stress that enough, that having good tools in place help you.
And we just have, I think, 1 or 2 more slides, but I think, Nicole, I mean, this is just kind of a reiteration of everything, just making sure that you're prepared, you're being proactive about, things that you're doing, keeping your records intact. I mean, I've seen so many conciliation agreements, and these are generally settlement agreements between the Ofccp and contractors where they find, certain violations. But a lot of those violations are simple record-keeping violations, right? And things that can be so easily avoided if you just have an organized manner and, an organized, efficient way of keeping all of your records, keeping them for the time required, and avoiding, racking up these violations that then turn into a conciliation agreement that then turn into, public information that's accessible to everyone, because all of these conciliation agreements are posted on the Ofccp website and are accessible to the whole general public. And the last thing you want is, for a client or someone to see that, and then obviously it doesn't look right optically. It can certainly harm and damage your reputation. So little things that can go a long way are definitely very, very important. And we're running short on time here, but I think doing an internal audit annually, so preparing proactively for a potential audit is actually just conducting one yourself internally, and just making sure that you go through the whole process, and then that way can recognize any problem areas that you may need to fix in the event that the Ofccp does notice you for an audit, or you can fill in any gaps. But regardless, we recommend our clients do these internal audits, or even do proactive pay analyses, because it's money and effort spent now that can save a whole lot of money and effort and stress when the Ofccp is at your door. And I think, Nicole, any kind of last minute reminders or notes here?
No, I think between the two of us, we've really touched on everything. And so, just my final reminder is to take every complaint seriously and just to be very organized. Everything that we've talked about will save a lot of trouble in the long run.
Right, absolutely. On that note, I apologize for keeping folks like 2 to 3 minutes over here, but I appreciate the time, Nicole. I sincerely appreciate all your time and expertise and experiences. Certainly helps to kind of hear the real world and practical implications of all this stuff beyond just the boring legal side, which is unfortunately what I do. But on that note, just a reminder, folks, that I do see a lot of questions, and I apologize for not really having the opportunity to go through all of them. But again, we'll turn these questions, we'll kind of retrieve a transcript of them and go ahead and, or feel free to email Nicole or I separately, and we're happy to answer these questions for you. But good luck, and feel free to reach out with any further questions or concerns. I appreciate it, Nicole.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for taking your time to listen to us.